So let me give a brief introduction into what we're going to be talking about today. And let me start out. Actually, you know what? I'm going to pin myself and Aleph here. Um, so let me introduce my co-host for today. Uh, not Peter. I'm not sure why that happened. Sorry, Peter. Um, let's try that again. There we go. Aleph Servo. So Aleph has been a longtime friend and collaborator and working with the ASA on engravings back to our Sibelius days before we entered a partnership with Dorico, and has been indispensable in terms of preparing the scores that we use to study in our sessions, as well as figuring out how to make best use of Dorico, or how to use Dorico, and then make best use, which we're still trying to figure out as we go along. And also has been spearheading a lot of the engraving process, overseeing that for the majority of our studies. So, Olive, do you want to give a brief introduction of yourself and your background, or?
Yeah, why not? Hi everybody, I'm Aleph. As Reuven has mentioned, I've been involved with the ASA probably for about 5 years now, and I moved out to LA about that time as well. I was born to a family of musicians. My father is a composer and university professor in Brazil. My mom was a classical pianist who never went down that road professionally, but the influence was still there. And then later in my life, my father was, or my stepfather was a bassist and singer, and actually became the replacement lead singer for the progressive rock band Yes.
I didn't know
uh,
that.
yeah, a lot of people don't. So I've always had a musical influence. Played piano when I was younger. Played a lot of vibraphone and mallet percussion through high school and college. Played in a couple of jazz combos in college as well. Studied music, and here I am, like the rest of us, trying to forge our path, um, in this endeavor, which is really a life goal, I would say, for everybody. So that's a brief introduction. And in terms of my involvement with the ASA, Reuven and I really take the helm with volunteering, with leading this volunteer groups. And I would say that he's more involved in the mock-up side of things. And then kind of when I got on board, I've been dealing with a lot of the notation stuff. So the scores that we end up using in our events have typically been proofed by me, or sometimes I'll compile everybody's work and try to do the best I can to make a nice looking score before our sessions, which is usually a last minute effort, but
What? That never happens.
never. But yeah, that's about it.
So, and yeah, Aleph has been really indispensable at helping out, especially in crunch time. So I just want to reiterate. I'm sure you've all heard this before, but the ASA is a volunteer-run organization, and I know many of you have volunteered and helped out. But we welcome all of you to do so, and if you feel like you don't know what you're doing, well, that's one of the reasons we're doing this event is to kind of bring you up to speed. But also, I can tell you from personal experience, the best way to get to being where you feel like you know what you're doing is just to start doing it and figure out what you don't know as you go along. I know that has been my approach to not just engraving and Dorico, but many elements of composing and related duties. Um, I just want to say that part of our goal here is to have a warm and fostering community where everyone can feel free to ask for help or advice on how to do certain things, or just getting started. And what we'd really like to do moving forward is grow our involvement in terms of preparing scores for study. I mean, we've got a few on the plate at the moment that we're looking at doing, including finishing up Superman, which we started last month. But I just want to encourage everyone to come on board as you're able, and as we'll explain, you don't have to sacrifice everything else going on in your life to do this. It can be just as you have time to make for it. So I think that's probably a good place to get started, is talking about what our organization is. Oh, I should just point out one other thing, which is, if you're looking to learn Dorico, we're not going to teach you that. Dorico has a bunch of really good online YouTube videos. I know John Barron does a bunch of stuff. They're a lot of their documentation is pretty good. There's some things that are missing, but they also have a very active Facebook forum, and I know I keep track of it, and I also regularly find answers to things that I'm looking for, either that way or just by Googling it. So probably don't expect to be an expert at Dorico at the end of this 2-hour session, but Olive and I will both sort of show what our process is in terms of working and inputting notation and the various permutations of that.
Yeah, can I also jump in real quick? Like I've been learning Dorico. I would say I'm intermediate at it right now. I've done probably 3-4 dozen scores in Dorico. And to be honest with you, and I'm a former Finale and Sibelius user, I found both of those programs cumbersome to learn with a steep learning curve. And then, once I kind of figured out their logic, it was easier to move around. I found Dorico to be exactly the same thing. The learning curve was steep for me, at least. Like, it took a while to figure out where things were. And there's some things about Dorico that were unintuitive to me at first, but in retrospect, once I understand the logic of the designers, it makes sense. One thing that was immensely helpful to me is I just opened up a word processing document that I keep in my Dropbox at all times. It's called How to Do Stuff in Dorico. And every time I come across something I'm trying to do, if I had to go scurrying to forums or Google or YouTube to learn it, I write it down for myself, just 1 or 2 lines, like, if I need to do a first ending, this is how you do it. And I tell you, every single time I open Dorico, I open up that document because my answer is always in there, and it's faster than doing the Google searching. Also, you didn't mention they have a really active forum on the Steinberg website.
Yes. Yeah, Peter posted a link to that in the chat.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's really valuable. All of the Dorico developers hang out there, and some very helpful users, so you can usually get answers in a matter of hours normally. So almost every time I open Dorico, I end up running to the forums for something or another to figure out how to do it. So I encourage you to use those resources. And if you're like me, just like start taking notes for yourself, because as you master a technique, even the smallest kind of technique of like how you do the silliest thing, it's just helpful to have that document open. And then I just search it. I'm like, Fermata, and there it pops up instantly without me having to troll through manuals or the internet. So
exactly, and one of the things that Olive and I will show you as we're showing you Dorico is one of the nice updates in version 4 is what they call the jump bar, which you can hopefully remember the shortcut.
What was that, please?
The jump bar. Mm-hmm. So J for jump, and basically it's the Dorico equivalent of a spotlight search if you're used to Mac or iOS. You just start typing whatever it is you're looking for, and it 99% of the time pops up and works like magic. So makes it a lot easier than having to remember which particular popover you need to use. So that's also very helpful. So let me start out just by giving you a behind the scenes peek at what our workflow looks like. So I'm going to share my screen here. There we go. And actually, that's what we're going to look at in a little bit. So this is the first thing that I'd like to show you. This is what I call a score and mockup tasks spreadsheet. This is in Google Drive, which we've been using as a way. In fact, let me show you my Google Drive tab. So as you can see, we have our Superman Suite folder here with everything related, and one of the related things is this spreadsheet, which lives online. And basically the way this works, for those of you who haven't seen this before, is we lay out a map of whatever score we're studying. And in this case, it's all in one tab. Sometimes with multiple movements, we'll do multiple tabs down here. And basically split it up in a way that makes sense. And I'll talk about how we make sense of that in a sec. And then divide it into everything. So as you can see here, we actually have Dorico, Sibelius, and Finale rows here, because for those who aren't working in Dorico, it's cool to work in Sibelius and Finale and upload MIDI and music XML files. And basically anybody who's interested in contributing can just add their name to the list. The list is over here, and basically these are all of our volunteers who have helped out. And once your name is in the list, it will appear in this drop down, and you just put your name here, and you've basically claimed section, in this case 48 it's bar number 48 through 62 of Dorico. But it could be Sibelius, it could be Finale, it could be just one of the sections. So really, it's up to you how much or how little you're interested in helping out. And if you're just getting started, go ahead and claim just a few bars of one section, and you can take a week or two just on that to figure out how to make it work. And again, from personal experience, I can tell you, there's no better way, I think, to learn a program than by using that program. So in this case, you don't have to think about which notes you're gonna write because you're composing it. Everything is already written, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to input it in a way that makes sense. Or if you're doing the mock-up, which we'll do an event about in a few weeks, same case. You can choose even one instrument and just try and get that instrument to sound good. And so it can be incredibly helpful in terms of getting up to speed. And Olive, tell me if you disagree with this. The more I find, the more that I do this, whether it's mock-ups or inputting scores into Dorico or Sibelius, the faster I get, because I'm developing that muscle memory. I'm learning the shortcuts. I'm figuring out where to find things, how to do things, etc.
Yeah, and it forces you to pay attention to every single little detail, especially with the notation aspect.
Oh, excellent.
I remember when we were doing Holst a couple of years ago, and every note, every articulation is so important. So it's a great learning process just for becoming a better musician, composer as well.
So I'm just quickly kind of jumping ahead here to the beginning of March of the Villains from Superman. You can see the PDF that we were working off of here, and you see, okay, we've got 3 horns playing this little cluster here in mutes, and you start to ask yourself, okay, why are they in mutes? Why not use the 4th horn, since there are 4 horns available? And you just For those of us who are not blessed with the ability to look at a score and take in everything at a glance, it really is a great way to really force yourself to delve into the details and understand why the composer and or orchestrator and or arranger made the decisions they did, musically, orchestrationally, and just how it looks on the page, which is also very useful. So please feel free to chime in with any questions. This is going to be hopefully a more interactive session where if you've got questions about this, let us know.
Ruben,
Yeah.
can you explain the sections? For example, I see it. There's section 1 that skips to 3, then 13.
So in this case, I prepared this very quickly, so I was taking a shortcut. Usually, what I would do is I would write 1 to 2, or maybe call it A, and then I would write bars 1 to 2, and then
Okay.
this would be 3 to 12. And if I go back to the score here, I just used the rehearsal marks as dividers. So every time in the score there's a rehearsal mark, so there's 13, I would just create a new section, assuming that the rehearsal marks are
Oh, I see.
Somewhat reasonable and make sense musically. If there aren't those kinds of divisions, then I'll make those decisions musically, trying to separate it into musical sections. So if there's a melodic phrase like an AABA form, each of those I'll make its own section. And generally, I'm just trying to make each byte manageable. I mean, having a 2-bar section is not particularly useful. I only did that because there was a rehearsal mark at 3, which is in itself kind of odd. But yeah, that's is basically just a way of figuring out how to divide the piece up in order to tackle it. And I'll also show in a bit how it helps in terms of tempo mapping. I'll show that process. But before I show that,
May I just interject this?
Yes.
So let's say Billy assigned for 32, and he's only going to do that section 32 through 39.
Right.
Would he save it as an XML?
Depending on how people are working, so if Billy is in Dorico and we're compiling the whole score in Dorico, then he can upload the score, which he actually did right here. I think Billy's on this call. Hi, Billy. So he'll upload the Dorico file. If somebody is working in a different program, and the truth is, even in Dorico, it's useful to upload music XML, or sometimes MXML, or just XML. And as you can see, these are labeled pretty detailed in terms of what they contain. Olive and I did not follow that rule because we were working very late at night and not thinking straight. But so you can see here, whoever did the Sibelius version uploaded the Sibelius file as well of bars 1 through 31 and the music XML. So the music XML allows us to import it into Dorico. And I believe there's also there's no MIDI folder in here. Sometimes we'll have a MIDI uploads as well. And MIDI can be helpful not just for importing into a notation program where it can be quite hit or miss. It can also be helpful in the mockup, because rather than needing to input each instrument on its own, you can start with a MIDI file and then start tweaking the MIDI to make it sound better. And that's actually something that I do quite often. I mean, it takes a lot of tweaking. You don't expect it to sound good right away, but having those MIDI exports out of a score can actually be a really handy way to make the mock-up process much faster as well. So it really is, like I said, a collaborative effort. Everything that anyone uploads is accessible to everybody who's volunteered to work on that score, and everyone is able to use them to help them do their own part, or use for whatever other personal study purposes, etc. So, Ken, does that answer your question?
Yes. So I'm not using Finale anymore. I'm moving into Dorico. So I would just upload just to Dorico, since that's what you're using predominantly. I don't have to worry about XML or anything.
You don't. Although, again, if there are people who are working in Sibelius or still working in Finale, who are either doing overlapping sections, or sometimes you'll have melodies that repeat in other sections, it can be handy to have access to those previous sections to be able to copy and paste.
Okay.
So I think in our guidelines, and Aleph is going to talk about this in a second, we actually encourage people to upload all three formats.
Okay.
Ideally, again, often we're working in crunch time and just trying to get what we need essentially. But the hope is that we make it a more drawn out, streamlined process where people are working overtime in collaboration, and we have everything prepared for score study not a few minutes before we start it.
Yeah, and I'll add that Dorico is actually very good at reading XML files. So if you do import something from Sibelius, Finale, I'm not sure, but if you import an XML that was made in Sibelius into Dorico, usually it does a pretty good job of translating the information.
Yeah, and it can also be an interesting experiment, even if you're just in a single notation program, to export a file as XML and then import it and see what is there and what isn't, what information is preserved. So besides this Google spreadsheet and Google Drive where we're managing our files, we've also started using Discord, and I have to thank Aleph for taking the initiative on this and getting this going. So Aleph, I don't know if you want me to show it here, or if you want to share your screen to show this, but if you want to talk about how we're using Discord and how we'd like to use Discord. Aleph, you're muted.
I suppose I can do that. Let's see here. So this will stop your screen sharing, which isn't terrible. So for those who don't know, Discord is used mostly by gamers. Actually, it was an application designed for gamers to be able to communicate in various voice channels, in Teams and everything like that. But it's great for just group projects and group communication. So when you first join the ASA Volunteers channel, and we will email somebody an invite link, and then they click on it and they're invited to join Discord. If they don't have Discord, and if they do, then it'll invite them into the server. It'll take you into this volunteer channel here, a welcome channel, and this little spiel at the bottom. And then if you click on these emojis down at the bottom, which are labeled appropriately with score prep mockups and formatting, then that gives us an idea of how you want to, or what you want to be involved with your volunteering efforts. And then we have a little ASA emoji as well that's just for guests. Eventually our plan is actually to open this Discord up to all ASA members, or not even members, anybody who's interested in the ASA, so we can have a little bit of a livelier internet
yeah, let me just
community, you know.
interject. Community is exactly the right word. I mean, Ron Jones started the ASA and the Revell Study Group with the primary goal of fostering the community here in LA. And over the past few years, as we became locked down in our homes, we have spread out more internationally, and we love the fact that we have members of our community from all around the world, and our hope is you don't have to wait for us to put on an event to interact with each other. I mean, we're all score nerds and composers and love geeking out about these things. So anybody who's on Discord can chime in at any point, start a discussion, ask a question. So yeah, it's we just our hope is to use it to keep the community in touch between events. And
I don't know if you
Yeah.
guys plan to spend more time discussing the insides of Discord, but like one of the things, because I'm a relative newbie to Discord, but for me it seems pretty cluttered. So like I launched this and I'm like, wow, there's a lot to read. Is there a place? Do you have any basic instructions for those of us who just kind of want to like catch up on things and figure out where to go next?
Yeah, so the learning curve for Discord is a little bit annoying. It's not very intuitive, and it helps when you're in a server that has a lot of people, because then you can just kind of ask around and get an idea for the flow of how it works. I mean, I can give a brief overview since we're here right now. This welcome page here is essentially the first thing you see and the first thing you have access to when you join the Discord. So it kind of forces you to read it all the way through, and then when you go down to the bottom, if you've read it carefully and follow the instructions, then by clicking on a role, what it'll do is it'll unlock this group of text and voice channels on the left. And after that, you'll get a notification to pop into the general channel. So this is the basic server structure for all Discord servers. Is you'll have a welcome channel sometimes, and then a general channel, which, as it sounds, is just a general channel. You can go in and talk about anything. After that, the moderator or administrator can create different channels. So for our purposes, we have a volunteer guidelines channel here on the left, and you can't actually post in this, but you can read it, and it's always there. And this gives some basic instructions on how to use the spreadsheet in Google Drives, for example, and then a very, very basic introduction to create tempo maps, which Reuven is going to go through. The plan eventually is to have a bunch of video tutorials in this volunteer guidelines channel, so that we have links that will just show you how our volunteer process works in video form. That is still on our wish list, or a work in progress, I suppose. Then we have an ASA info channel that as of yet is not used, but the goal here is to basically get all of the email information or email announcements for different events to pop up in this ASA info channel. And I believe that we can do some, man, I'm blanking on the word, some integrations such that when an email is sent out to our volunteers, the contents will post directly into the ASA info channel. So it's basically a bulletin board. The general board here, I see people are posting. Oh, some people have joined.
welcome.
Yeah, you know, we don't have to talk about specific projects here. But anyway, so I'm an administrator, so this is not really going to work. But the way that we have this set is that if somebody has a role, for example, Peter over here, so the people who are active online are going to be on the right-hand side. So I see Peter is active. And he has a role that's score prep, which is the role that he chose in the welcome channel down here. So when he read through this and went down below, he clicked on this little emoji here, and that gave him what's called a role, right? And that role is score prep. So that indicates that he's interested in volunteering with score prep. Let's see here. What that role also, what some roles also do is give access to other channels. So if I go over here and as an administrator, add him to the Superman role, right? Then he will display as being active in Superman. And you'll see that he is now in a separate role category that displays here. So volunteer
Olive,
leaders.
why is it significant that he's active in Superman specifically?
Right. So the reason why that's significant is he will now have access to this category of channels that says copyright sensitive. And if we go into the copyright sensitive channels, he won't see the aliens because that was a prior event and I removed access to that event, but he will see the Superman general chat. And so once you're in Superman general, then we can talk about project specific details that's sometimes copyright sensitive. This is not an example of that, but you know, and then here is where we do our actual work. And then we have, I say you could call them sub channels, one that's specifically for score prep and one that's specifically for mockups. And then probably the best feature is voice chat as well. So if people want to jump into voice, then they just connect with their microphone and they can talk about anything they want. Discord also gives you the opportunity to upload files. There is a file limit, I think, of about 8 megabytes right now, but if we do get Discord Nitro, I think that increases to 100. So
still doesn't go very far, but
yeah.
That's
yeah,
one of the reasons we're using Google Drive.
Yeah, and yeah, so I mean that's a basic overview, I suppose. And right. Like I said, with Discord, the more people who are active and the more people who are involved, the better it is for those who are trying to use it either casually or, you know, for our volunteer efforts.
Cool. But and I'm glad to see our numbers are growing by the minute. And also, Vanessa, I see you're asking about why we're talking about Discord. So for those who might have missed it at the beginning, we're not going to teach you how to use Dorico. There are better resources online for that. We're going to show how we're using it for our projects and our process of how we work within Dorico individually, which may or may not be of use in terms of how you decide it best suits your own workflow. So before we move on, does anybody have any questions about Discord or of course, once you've joined Discord, you can ask that on Discord too, and hopefully somebody will answer you there. All right.
If someone gave a link to this, I see. Okay, I was going to ask for a link, and someone did it. So thank you.
Yeah. That link I forgot to change the settings, so it's only good for a week. But as long as you click on it within the next 7 days, you'll get access to our Discord channel. So all right, let's move on and talk about. I'm going to go back and share my screen again. There we go. So let's talk about this first row after we've divided up the score tempo map. So one of the things we do, and this is in part so that we can have everything be in sync, is we'll actually map out the cue or score that we're studying to a particular recording. So sometimes that'll be a soundtrack recording. Sometimes that'll be to the film itself, which is really helpful for looking at orchestrational choices to the picture. In this case, it's to this Superman suite, and this particular performance. I'm drawing a blank on where who performed it. Let me see if I can find that. No, it doesn't say. So we found a performance, an audio performance that corresponded to this score. And so I'm going to show you my my Cubase session here and show you briefly how my process for mapping it out. So this will vary slightly from one DAW to another. In this particular case, in Cubase, so I've imported the audio file here, and the first thing I'll do is I'll make sure that the music is starting right at bar 1. Very important, because if you're not starting in the right place, then nothing will matter afterwards. And I'll also make sure in this case that this track, so in Cubase you have this toggle between time bass and music bass, and so I want to make sure that this is time bass, and in Logic you would lock it and that would have the same effect, but again you want to make sure that it's starting in the right place before anything else. And then you need to make sure that everything lines up. So how do you do that? So in this case it's already done, but I'm going to show you what it might look like before any of that is done. So right now I'm at 120 BPM at 4/4. Peter, I'll answer your question in a second. And I've got my time code ruler here, so you can see that this is about 12 minutes and change. 12 minutes and 10 seconds or so from beginning to end. And I have no other information, except I do have the notated score. So the first thing I'll do, and I think this is probably going to be best practice for any. Well, actually, the first thing I'll do is I will find the very end of the piece and drop a marker there. And you can see up here I've got a marker track. That's this little thing here. So now I have the beginning of this. It's actually 3 movement piece, and the end. And do I know what bar that is? Well, if I scroll all the way to the end, I don't have a bar number here, but if I go a couple pages back, I have a rehearsal number here, 265. So I just count the bars until the end, and I discover that actually this last downbeat is bar. Well, I can look it up here because I did this calculation already. 265. So actually no, it's not 265. It's 6, 7, 8, 9, 270, 1, 2, 273. So the downbeat of 273 is the very end. So I now know that this is bar 273. So this is where it starts getting different from one program to another. Cubase has this fantastic tool called the warp tool. And what the warp tool does is it allows me to drag any bar or even beat or subbeat and drag it to any other moment. And it will automatically move or it'll create a tempo that matches exactly. So I'm gonna click on bar 1. Just you can see now there's a tempo event at bar 1. And what did we say to 273? So I'm gonna find bar 273, which is here. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. I'm just gonna drag this approximately to there. And I don't really care right now about fine tuning. I'll deal with that later. Now the other thing that does matter, and this is usually the next thing I'll do, is meter changes. So if there are meter or time signature changes in the piece, that will affect the total number of beats. So Cubase is better equipped to deal with it afterwards. In Logic counts the number of beats, and it doesn't matter what bar number it is. If you're in 4/4 and then you decide you're in 3/4, it'll still go by number of beats. So if you put something in, you'll suddenly realize that it's off because you changed your time signature. So very important is to go through the score or the cue and see if there are any time signatures changes, which in this case I know that there are somewhere around here. It goes to 12/8 at some point. Well, I'm going to cheat here because I already did the hard work. So I'm going to go back to my original time signature lane, and I can see that bar 57, there's a 2/4 bar, which then goes back to 4/4, and a 6/4 bar at 61. So I'm going to go through and put those all in. Now, one caveat is if you happen to find a MIDI file of the piece, so for a lot of classical pieces, you can go online and find MIDI files, which are more often than not accurate. For some film score cues, you can find online MIDI files. If you import that MIDI file, it'll also import the meter changes or the time signature changes, and that can be a big help. I'll always double check that against the score to make sure everything matches, but that especially if there are some of the James Horner scores, there were 3/4 2/4 back and forth for a long time. So rather than inputting that all manually, if you can import something that already contains all those changes, it makes your work a lot easier. And once you've done that, you have the overall length of the piece, which you can see already is wrong because that should have been bar 273, and I can see it's 235, I believe. So I would have to redo that. And the next thing I'll do is just adjust each section. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to listen. So this is the beginning of the second movement, which I know because I listened to this over and over again as I was doing this process. So I will find in the score. Yeah, there it is. No, I skipped it. There it is. Can you read my mind? So this is bar 62. And so this one is actually a little bit tricky because this ends almost at nothing, which you can actually see in the waveform here. So this is the end of the Villain's March. So I'm gonna try and find this and pick it up. There's a bassoon. There's our flute. Oh. There we go. So I've got a great downbeat right there. That triangle hit, which I know is right on this downbeat, which is bar 61 because it's one bar before 62. So what I would do is drop a marker there and go back to my very cool warp tool, and I'm just going to drag bar 61 to right there. And now I know that bar 61 is in the right place. Now, I can make changes before and after bar 61, but with the way the warp tool works in Cubase, this is now in the right place. Barbara asks, will bars and beats synchronize with audio? Yes, as long as your settings are correct. So again, make sure that your audio track is in Cubase I don't even remember the name of this button, in time base and not music base. If it's music base, then it'll follow when you change the bars and beats. In Logic, it needs to be locked. I think in DP it needs to be locked. Basically, every DAW has its own system for determining whether or not things are synced to musical terms in terms of bars and beats or to time. And as long as it's synced to time, then you can move the bars and beats and not make any changes.
Do you have MIDI files on this, or MIDI tracks, or no?
Not in this particular one. No.
Okay. Yeah, because it'd be cool to demonstrate how when you change the use the warp tool to change the marker placement, how that affects MIDI as well as opposed to audio. But
yes,
just visually.
I can open up my mock-up and show that. Let me just quickly finish up. So my process is going from big to small. So I'll divide it up into the 3 sections, and then I'll go through. You can see I've dropped markers here, basically on section changes as I'm following along with the score, and then line up the bars with those markers. And if I go back to my mapped out version, so I'm going to turn on my click now and play with the click, and let me. So you can hear that the click is right on. I have a very slight tempo change there. You can see that changes to 101.304, which is, I didn't calculate, I just used the warp tool to do that. Yes, Charles, good point. The time base is very, very frustrating. That's hidden by default, and in this case I started from a blank template, so it was hidden. So basically I'm going through and making sure that everything lines up, and in some cases, as you can see over here in bar 57 with that 2/4 bar. So now I'm changing every bar, and there's actually slight retardando there. And in this case, I did a little trick where this might not actually be notated as a 6/4 bar. This is where we were looking before, in the transition before the Can You Read My Mind? So yes, this is actually a 4/4 bar in the score. So the reason I made it a 6/4 bar, and this is something I picked up from conducting live to picture, is I wanted to set up a preparation at the new tempo for the next section. So I actually added two beats that are not notated in the score, and the last 2 beats are at the new tempo. So although I didn't do the mock-up of Can You Read My Mind, if I am, I'm already at the right tempo, and I have a 2 beat click into the downbeat of this little very active section here. So I will get creative here in some cases, and also if you're importing MIDI, you have to make sure that if you make changes like that, you account for it in the MIDI. You move stuff around in the MIDI. But again, that's sort of my own personal decision. That's at your personal discretion if you're doing it, and that's one of the reasons why up here in the spreadsheet there's a notes place. So I might put in which I didn't, bar 61 made 6/4, just so that everybody else can see that and understand what's going on there. And that's basically it. I just want to go to a place that has a retard so you can sort of see how the tempo map follows every beat of the retard. I should say retardando. I assume everybody knows that's what I mean by retard. This is definitely recorded free. Long. And sometimes it takes a lot of fine tuning to get this to match up. It doesn't necessarily need to be exact. The advantage of it being exact is when you're working on the mock-up, you can actually play along with the recording and check that things sound good, and sound like they're part of the score. And I never cease to be amazed when you mute the live stuff and hear only the mock-up or parts of the mock-up, and it's like, oh, they're all playing together. So it's really great practice. I also I always go back to something that Joe Kramer said a few years ago when he was a guest of ours, which is one of the reasons he got so good at mock-ups was because he would do this kind of thing. He would mock up either film scores or orchestral pieces from the classical repertoire and tweak it until he could be it with the live performance and not be able to tell which one was which. So great practice. Again, we're going to delve into this more when we talk about mock-ups specifically. But the other advantage of this is it means you can export this MIDI file with all these tempo changes, import it into Dorico or your DAW of choice, and if I turn signposts on, oh, they are on, but I think no tempo signpost. Oh, right, this is fairly. You know, let me go into galley mode. Here we go. So basically, every place I have a tempo change, you can see this what Dorico calls signpost with the tempo changes. So where was I with that big change? Bar 140. So if I go to bar 140, you can see a lot of these signposts because they're changing here almost every beat. So that basically means that if I try playing, let me go to the beginning of this section. If I try playing this, so this is the note playing out of Dorico, and if I go to the actual score at bar 62, it's a lot quieter, but you're hearing exactly the same tempo. So that can also be useful if you're trying to figure out what's going on and hear what's going on. Having it play in sync, I think, is a nice advantage. So I think that's all I've got to say about tempo mapping, unless anybody has any other questions about that. I'll take that silence as a no. So in that case, let's dig into Dorico. So while I load up my Cubase mock-up here, so I can just show what happens with the MIDI when I do use the warp tool. Why don't you go ahead and start talking about the setup window, and I don't know if you want to share your screen instead.
Yeah, let's do that. So yes. Okay. So Dorico is intelligent in many ways, but one of those ways in which is intelligent is you have different tabs up here that correspond to different modes. So your right mode here is your general input window or mode, and this is where you can do all note input, and then they have a separate tab here for engraving. So this is a little bit of a tangent, but if I grab this mezzo forte here and I select it in right mode and I try to move it around, it's not going to let me, well, it will move, but it won't let me move it So if I move it to the right, for example, it'll change the note with which that dynamic is actually associated. But if I go in engrave mode, for example, I can select this dynamic separately and move it independently, right? Because that's an engraving change, not an inputting change. So there's those two modes, and then there's also the setup mode, which is where we should start.
Right, and again, please refer to the Dorico information to get more specific about this. But I think it's important to understand for our purposes because we're looking at scores that have combined instruments, and for those of us who came from Sibelius and Finale, we would input those instruments as combined instruments. That it's a conceptual change to the way Dorico works.
Yes, thank you, Ruben. So in setup mode, you can basically add and remove players. I believe when you're first starting out a score, you can select a template, as with any program, but Sibelius in that sense. But then you have players here, and so each player corresponds to a specific player, not necessarily a stave. Because if I take this flute one player and I go here to this little plus sign and click that, I can give him another instrument if I'd like. And let's say we give him a baritone bulge just because the flute one player.
Yeah, why shouldn't flute also play bugle?
Bugle, not bulge. Bugle.
Same thing.
Man, this is slow to process. Okay, so now the flute player also plays baritone bugle. We'll see, right now I'm in page view, but if I go into galley view down here, we will find a separate stave. Man, my program is slow. A separate stave here that corresponds to the flute one player is a separate instrument, right? So then if I go over here and I input in right mode a note in the baritone bugle, and then I go back to page view, this player will then switch instruments to baritone bugle, right? So then that player is responsible for both instruments. Let's delete this because we don't want it.
Right, but you can actually see a good example of that already with the flute 3, which is doubling on piccolo.
Yeah.
So it'll show up in right mode as two different instruments, even though it's a single player.
Yeah. If we go back to galley view here.
Now, if you write for two different instruments at the same time, you better be sure that the player can actually do that. I mean, it is possible with percussion instruments, for example, but probably not flute and piccolo simultaneously. That would be a very impressive flutist.
And it doesn't show in galley view that the piccolo and the flute 3 are same players, but it does show up in setup here. If we go to flute 3, it'll show piccolo and flute 3.
Right, and I believe that's by design because, I mean, for example, you could have multiple flute players doubling on piccolo, even if there's only one piccolo part at a time. So I think that's the rationale behind it, but I might be mistaken.
Yeah, interesting. All right, so what else should I demonstrate here? How to add?
So I would just talk about section players versus individual players. So
right. So yeah. So when we have different options here for adding players, you can add a single player and a section player. And section players, I believe, man, I don't even remember the difference because it's been so long since I've used this. But section players would be strings, for example, right?
Right, strings, choir, that sort of thing. I mean, you could also have a section of brass or woodwinds, but basically you're telling Dorico this is a group of players, not just a single player, and that comes into play when you start dealing with things like divisi.
Right.
Because a single player could not divisi, whereas a section can.
Yeah, and Reuven is a little bit more well versed in use of divisi, because a lot of the times I prefer just inputting things as separate voices. But for our purposes, it really is wise to start getting into the habit of using divisi whenever there's multiple voices on a stave that would normally divide its sections. We can get into that a little later, I think, probably.
Yeah.
You probably have some examples of that in the third movement.
Yeah, I do. And then the other thing I would talk about is percussion, because often in an orchestral score you'll have just a regular 5-line staff that's notated as percussion, or multiple staves, whereas with Dorico, I mean, it's very customizable, but for non-pitched percussion, it's usually just a one-line staff, which makes a lot more sense, and you can assign multiple percussion instruments to a single player. But in this case, where we're just studying the score, we don't really care about who's playing what. We just care about what percussion instruments are there.
Yep.
Right, piano and celeste. That I know that you made that a combined instrument because that's how it was in the score, right?
I did, and I don't think there's any part where celeste and piano are playing simultaneously. So, and also I have it such that it's displaying, I believe, according to whichever instrument is playing. I'm messing around with like editing in the names and stuff. So I actually gave the piano is named piano and celeste, and then the celeste, I believe.
Right.
Because there's different ways. I was messing around with the options, because you can actually go in here to layout mode, or to layout options, and change how the instrument and staff labels display. So if I go over here to, yeah, I can show the player name instead of the instrument name, for example.
Right.
And I don't really remember why I was doing that, but when you do have, one just playing, yeah, but then there's the issue with grand saves as well. So let's not even get into that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, Dorico is infinitely customizable, and there are ways to do what you want. Sometimes it's the right way, sometimes it's the wrong way. And a lot of times Aleph and I will experiment to figure out which is which. Again, a lot of this process is figuring out the best way of working, which is one of the reasons that we're doing this is to talk about what we've figured out. But there's not necessarily one single way of doing it properly. What I would say is there's a way that I've found that some people who are new to Dorico do, which is creating a player and then making up an instrument, and that, or maybe a combined instrument, and that's a problem because Dorico has designations as far as what instruments can do what, range-wise, notation-wise, transposing, etc. And if you create an instrument that Dorico doesn't recognize, say piano and celeste, I mean, you and I know that that's two different instruments, but if you were to create an empty instrument and call it piano and celeste, Dorico would say, I have no idea what you want here, so this is going to be fairly random and may or may not look like what you want. So I think understanding the rationale behind the way this works is important. And then the other thing, which causes lots of confusion because Dorico handles this in a very different way than Sibelius and Finale, is the issue of flows. So, if you want to bring up the bottom tab. So, this is actually a great example of how flows can be used and is helpful. So in this case, we've created a separate flow for each movement of this piece, of which there are 3. So the flows are also part of the setup window. And again, if you're seeing this for the first time, you're thinking, well, what does this have to do with the players and the instruments? And the answer is, you can have some players who are only playing in particular flows. So if you uncheck one of the flows down below, so currently you've selected flute 1.
Right. So honestly, to be honest, this does confuse me sometimes. But if we select this flow, right, which is the first movement, March of the Villains, you'll see that every instrument is represented in this flow. But then if I unclick here, will it even let me do that? Let's see.
Maybe not, because there.
It says player comes up and it says removing a player from a flow will also delete all its music in that flow. Do you want to continue?
Yeah, it's fine. We don't care about flute 1. That's what the undo button is useful for.
Yes.
So Dorico is thinking now, and we will suddenly discover that we no longer have flute 1 and flute 2. We only have flute 2 and piccolo in March of the Villains. But if we go to the second movement, there's flute 1 again.
Yep.
So you can decide which instruments play in which flows, and it's incredibly configurable. It's also kind of confusing because there's so many options, and we don't really care about layouts at the moment. That's more for when you're actually printing out parts, but you can do the same, where you can create layouts and custom layouts for the full score and for the individual parts. I think we won't get into too much of how we do our own layout, because we haven't deviated so much from the standard at the moment. That's, I think, what's most important about the setup window.
Yeah, you can think of flows as like separate movements within a larger scale work, but if you're doing, trying to make educational music or something, you can also treat or exercisers, for example. That's a good example.
Right.
If you have a bunch of staves that have no staff labels and you want separate exercises, you can create that as different flows. And I don't know if so frames is different, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Let's not get into frames, because that's very.
Yeah.
The short version is you can lay it out any way you want. So you can have multiple flows on one page. You can have, in the case of an orchestral piece where you would have a movement on a new page, you just set that up as the default, but it doesn't have to be that way. So it's very flexible. Again, check out the Dorico videos and forums. I know that every couple weeks somebody asks about flows on the Facebook forum, and are quickly given explanations by the very kind and patient other Dorico users or John Barron. So here, Kareem, let me post that Dorico the Discord link again. Cool. So let's talk about inputting music. So, Olive, you've got our PDF of the score, or maybe a printed score, and you have a bunch of blank bars like in bar 122. So what does your process look like? How do you actually input notation into Dorico.
Yep. So right now I have another monitor set up with the PDF open to page 31. If you guys want to follow along. It's been a while since I've used Dorico, so this might be a little bit clumsy to begin with. But usually I'll start with the woodwinds. Depends on the music, of course, but in this case there is woodwinds playing. So this is the key change right at E major, which is helpful.
Olive, I think we're only seeing your one screen. Any chance you can do side by side the PDF? And...
Can I do that? My screen is kind of tiny, so I'm not sure if that'll look very good, but I'll do my best here. Let's see. Yeah, so let's just work 2 bars at a time, probably. Let's see. Right, so default command for inputs is Shift-N, at least on Windows, because I'm on Windows.
Yeah, it's
and I use the number pad to select the note duration.
So I'll go ahead and do that, and then I'll ask you to open up the left panel so that we can see what that looks like.
Sure. Yeah, so 6 is your default quarter note, and then 5 would be 8th note, 4 16th note, 3 is 32nd note, 7 is a half note, 8 is a whole note. So I have a piano, that's how I prefer inputting. So I'll go ahead and do Shift-N over here, and then I'll go to 6, which is my quarter note, and I'll keep my left hand on the number pad and my right hand on the piano and just change the note duration as I'm inputting. So. Right, so I messed up there, so I'll go in here and change the duration, and then if you click the period, that'll add a dot. Whoopsie daisy. Right, and now I'm on bar 123. So that's all wrong.
This is why we do this. It helps us practice our score reading, especially with very
Exactly. So one of the things that's cool, and it's not so useful here because the duration is all the same, but you can actually go into, if you press L, what that does is I believe it's L, isn't it?
No.
Yeah.
Oh, lock to duration. Yes.
Lock to duration.
I actually never use that.
Yeah. So for some reason it doesn't appear to be selecting though. Strange.
You have to open up the left panel, I think.
Why is that? Let's see. No, it should be locking, but it's not. Oh, probably because I need to select there we go. So if I'm in write mode or note input mode and I select lock to duration, then let's just change this for the purposes of demonstrating this feature. So Shift-N, L, lock to duration, then whatever notes I input, what it'll do is when it gets to, it'll maintain the rhythmic value of the notes, but it'll change the note pitch. So that's very useful when you have sections that have very complicated rhythm, but even across multiple instruments, you can copy the part, and then if the rhythmic content is the same, but the notes are different in different instruments or different staves, an easy way to do that is just to copy and paste the part and then lock to duration, and that way you can just input the notes. But anyway, going back here to the part again. There we go. Now this is all an octave up in the flute, but what I'll notice here is that these parts are pretty much the same all through the clarinets and oboes as well. So what I would do here is I would actually go in, select this, press S, that gives me a slur. There's a slur here as well. I'd go over here to this note, seems to be, there's a staccato. Over here, there's a tenuto mark. And then there's popovers as well. So Dorico has something called popover menus, and if you see this on the right side here, you'll notice that there's several of them, and they all correspond to different elements of the music. So this would be meter, for example, and this would be key signature. This would be clef. So if I go in here and I press Shift C, that'll bring up the clef popover. And then there are shorthand notations for all of these different elements that are represented within the clef menu. So if I want an 8VA line, for example, I just write 8VA, and that'll create an 8VA right on that note. If I were to select the whole measure.
Well, wait a minute, because it just moved the note down an octave.
Yes, it did, because it is essentially identifying the pitch that I put in there, right? And then when you add the AVA line, it moves it down an octave because the note that you inputted was at a certain register.
So in other words, it's. I mean, this is one of the things where Dorico operates differently. So AVA is akin to a clef change. So if you were to change it to bass clef, for example, it wouldn't adjust the pitch that you had. It wouldn't move the pitch an octave down. It would just notate it as it relates to bass clef. So in the same way, AVA does not adjust the pitch. It just adjusts how the pitch appears, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
By the way, Kareem notes that the slur begins after the staccato, which actually brings up a great point, which is one of the things that we want to do with our community is not just have people inputting these scores, but also proofing them to see if there are any errors, which there invariably are. And proofing itself is very helpful, just in terms of, again, forcing you to look at the detail and see what's going on, but less time consuming than inputting. So that's one of those categories that we have as on our volunteer list in Discord, and if you're able to volunteer to proofread, and I believe, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, was Dorico allows you to. You don't have to have the paid version of Dorico to open a score. You can't. The free version limits you to how many staves you can actually create a notated score, but I believe that you can open a full score and look at it. So anyone would be able to proofread a Dorico score with the free version of Dorico, even if you don't own the paid version.
Real quick rewind to that 8VA issue. Understanding why Dorico does that is actually kind of crucial to many other areas of the program, because in talking with the developers, the way that the developers conceive of Dorico is that they consider your note input to be kind of the most sacred thing you can do, and they will dissuade you from accidentally making any changes or making any errors. So when you think about the AVA thing, let's say you input an E4, and then let's say you decide you want this notated as an AVA. It is going to preserve the integrity of the E4 by notating an E3 with an AVA over it. That's why it does what it does. So you kind of have to think of it that way. When you're doing note input, you input things the way input them the way you want them to sound. Then, if you're going to use AVA lines or AVB or whatever they are, you're now tweaking the look of the note that you input. But Dorico is not going to assume that, oh, they really need an E5 here, to think of it backwards. So that philosophy is actually kind of important all over Dorico.
And the other thing that it comes into play, I don't think there's any examples of this on this particular page, but ties. So those of us who've worked in Sibelius for Finale know that a tied note is simply two notes with a tie, which looks exactly like a slur, put together. Not the case in Dorico. So, Olive, would you mind just extending that last F over the bar line?
Yeah, I'll actually go down here to the bass clarinet and just input that as well, because that has a tie in it. So, where is my bass clarinet? Whoopsie daisy.
Ah, yes. Well,
so let's see. Right. So, what are we demonstrating again? Ties.
A tie.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. If I so the way I would input a tie is I would probably prefer to input this as the individual notes first, and then select the first one and add a tie. But once you do that,
well, how did you add the tie?
You press T for tie. Very simple. Okay. Once you do this, it'll treat this note as one entity pretty much. So if I change the note, or change the pitch of the note, you'll notice it selects all of them. I can't select. Yeah, I can't select just a single note and change the value.
Right. And for me, the best way to make sense of this is it's like looking at MIDI in a piano roll. The fact that it's it's 2.5 beats doesn't mean that it's a half note tied to an eighth note. It's a 2.5 beat note, and wherever you move it, it's still going to be 2.5 beats. So that is, I mean, to me, that was one of the keys to unlocking how to use Dorico was understanding that, and I mean that after I got wrapped my head around it, then it became much easier to work around. So, Olive, you want to just show how you would copy those woodwind parts, and then I'll share my screen and do a little bit, because my workflow is quite a bit different.
Yeah. So in this sort of music where everybody's playing in unison and there's separate saves, something that I would consider doing, for example, is just writing across multiple staves, right? So right now I've selected all the clarinets and all of the flutes and the piccolo. And if I wanted to, I could input this. Let's see if I can do this right this time around. So that's a really cool feature in Dorico.
Yeah.
And if you select 3 staves, for example, or you do note input across 3 staves, what you can do is actually play chords if you have a keyboard, for example, right?
Right, and we can see that it's actually transposing the piccolo in real time, so...
It'll transpose the piccolo, but then it'll also know. I guess you guys can't hear my audio through Dorico, but if you play triads, for example, across three, it'll actually write those triads in consecutive order. So it's very useful for chordal input. But with something like this, I would probably write all 4 bars. I'm going to stick to 2 for now. Delete all of this. And I would actually go in here and using the popover for clef or for dynamic input, which is Shift E or Shift D rather.
Shift D, yeah, D for dynamic.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'd come over here and put in a fortissimo, then put in a hairpin there, like so. And I would even go ahead and put in articulations for this. There are none. But then I would copy this whole thing across all of these parts. And what you will see, for some reason, my fortissimo disappeared. I don't know why that is. But these dynamics are all linked together now. So if I delete one of them, oh, for some reason it didn't delete all of them.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I still don't quite understand this, but if I were to make a change to one, then it would change
Right.
all of them because they're all linked. I think when you delete, it's a little bit different, but I've yet to.
So if you right click on the dynamic, you'll see you have options for if you go down to dynamics for group and link. So grouping grouping I think is horizontal and linking is vertical, or it might be vice versa.
Grouping is horizontal and linking is vertical.
Right. So like the fortissimo and the hairpin would be grouped, and so if you move one, the other would move with it if it's grouped. If not, then they're independent. And then linking is across the staves. So if you make any changes, it's supposed to work with delete. I think there might be something weird going on.
Yeah.
This particular case.
It's possible. If just to demonstrate this, so right now these hairpins are all grouped together. So if I extend one, right, it'll extend all of them. But I can also move the hairpin there, and the fortissimo won't move with it. I think
Right.
if I now group the fortissimo, or group the fortissimo with the hairpin, it'll treat this as one. Oh no, it doesn't. Interesting. So yeah.
So one thing that you can do, if you delete all the dynamics, which I think I have a custom key command for. So if you were to select the first three beats and type Shift D, and then type fortissimo and then the lesser than symbol, aka hairpin, then it'll automatically group those.
Yep.
I don't know why. That was probably from before.
Yeah. Why did? Yeah. So if I do that. Yeah, so the thing is it's basically treating this dynamic as a continuation of this other hairpin. And because all of these hairpins are grouped, or linked rather, it automatically puts them in all the other staves. So this behavior does irritate me sometimes when I'm trying to input independent dynamics.
Right.
And I still don't understand why it's doing that, but
yeah, sometimes it's either a little buggy or just doing something that you don't know why it's doing. But that's why you have the option of unlinking and ungrouping when that happens. Is you can make it independent. I also saw Juan say that the tied note being one entity is annoying when inputting dynamics, and I'm going to show my workaround for that. So, anybody have any questions for Aleph?
Yeah, just to finish off here. So
Yeah.
piccolo, these are all the wrong octaves, right? So I would select all of this and go up an octave.
Wait, how do you do that?
So on PC, that'll be Control Alt up arrow.
In Mac is option Command Option up and down.
And then, you know, I would go in here and selectively delete whatever the piccolo isn't playing. That would be my approach to this short section here. I think this is pretty straightforward music too. So unless there are any other questions, I think.
It's
Oh
just
yeah, here, if we go back down trumpets, for example, this will be good to input. For our 122 trumpet 1 and 2 over here. So I would basically notate these across both parts because, or actually all three, but I'm just going to do trumpet 1 and 2 for now.
Yeah, you actually have
When you input music, Dorico will essentially force the rhythmic duration to whatever the rules for proper metering are, right? So if I were to try to input this as it's written here, it's not really let me do that because it wants to respect the rhythmic values of the beats. So what I would do instead is I would go over here and deselect rest and select force duration. The shortcut for that is O. And that way it'll let me input the rhythmic value as I put it in. Now, if I were to do that in the trumpet 3 part without selecting force duration, it would come out like this. Wrong note, but that's okay. Oh no, okay. So it does default to that actually.
I was expecting it to do a tied eighth.
But that's because if we go into notation options, let's see, note grouping, there are rules for how it actually displays in 4/4.
Which
somewhere. Yeah, so here, notation of short, long, versus short, long, short patterns.
Right.
So if I were to select this, for example, let it calculate the change.
So one of the reasons that this takes a while is it's actually going through the entire score or at least this particular flow and adjusting everything. So, except
wow, it's didn't change.
Well, maybe because you did the okay. In theory, that would be. Oh yeah, it's the one.
Oh, this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one.
Bye, Jeff. Glad you could join us. So yeah, and if I would just add, since all those notes have tenuto, you could actually press the shortcut key to add tenuto before inputting it, and it would add it rather than doing it afterwards.
Yep, that is true. So for me, that would be Shift 3. So if I do Shift 3 while I'm in the note input mode, and then it'll add. Whoopsie daisy. It'll add the tenutos.
Right. So and Morgan, I know this was just a direct message, but I'm gonna answer for everywhere. Morgan asks me if I ever have to find ways to work around Dorico if I'm not able to copy the original score exactly as it's written, and ever is superfluous because frequently it's difficult to recreate the score as written, And this is actually something that we Aleph and I discuss regularly. Is do we want to be faithful to the way it was written, or notate it in a way that either follows Dorico's rules or we think makes most sense? And I don't know if there's any one right or wrong answer. I know when I've used Dorico as a composer for my own pieces, there are times where I've overwritten the Dorico defaults because I felt like it conveyed my musical intent better. But it really is a situation by situation basis. Here, let me share my score because
Yeah, a good example of this would be bar 87, and let's see where that would be in the PDF. This should be sort of the beginning of the second movement. Page.
right around there already.
While you're fishing around for that, I'll highlight another really useful Dorico feature, which is commenting. It's Option C on a Mac. I use it all the time. It's one of my shortcuts. But anytime I'm engraving something of questionable origin and I don't know whether to interpret it in this way or that way, I'll actually insert a Dorico comment and I'll describe the problem that way. Later on in the process, I could maybe consult with somebody who's more experienced than me and kind of go through that, A/B the Dorico against the handwriting and say, what do you think we should do?
And so commenting is great for that, and also Discord is perfect for having those discussions where anybody who's on that channel of that particular score can go back and see what the discussion was. So those are both excellent tools. So I'm at 87 here. Let me go to 87 in the score. So what?
So it's sort of just my approach to trill notation. You'll notice it's significantly different, or at least slightly different in the score as compared to how Dorico does it. In large part because I just could not really replicate that notation in terms of what Dorico allows you to do with trills.
Right. So yeah, and I mean, this is a great example. So Dorico always has a left panel, a bottom panel, and a right panel, which the shortcuts are Command 7, Command 8, and Command 9, respectively, or Command 0 to toggle them all on or off. And if you, in the bottom panel, it has a properties of whatever you have selected, which can sometimes be a little bit confusing. So for example, you can choose whether or not to display the trill line, and you can also choose, as has been done here, the appearance, which in this case is an auxiliary note. There's also Hollywood style, which says whole tone or half tone, or just as an accidental. So if it's a sharp or flat, it'll show it. Otherwise, it won't show anything. So Aleph, which were you? The tie is what you were.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
I chose to represent the trill, indicating the note in parentheses because that's the closest to the actual score. But as far as I know, there's.
Yeah, that's a very weird. I don't know that I've seen that before, especially with the tie. I mean, I guess that would indicate there's legato, but I don't know that you would ever play a trill non-legato. So that's a bit odd.
But yeah, you should also talk about the intervallic distance in the trill as well, because that's something you can change in the properties menu.
Right. So
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, no, you'll notice if you look at the score that some of the trills, well, the default, I believe, in Dorico is to do a harmonic trill, right? Whatever the key signature is, it'll respect the key signature. But if you need something that is outside of the key signature, then you're going to have to do a manual adjustment to.
So how would you do that?
The interval, which is down in the properties panel down below. You can see for that trill, it's a major second,
Right.
but you can select any interval that you want, including diminished and augmented intervals.
So a double augmented trill, and there you go. Now you have a C trilling to a D double sharp, aka E, which is possible, even though I don't know why you would choose to notate something that way. And if you were to do it Hollywood style, yeah, it's still going to do an aux note because it doesn't. There's no abbreviation for double augmented second, but
And then you can also change the interval position. So some trills are starting or going up, and the other ones are going down in the score, and you can change that by selecting above or below in the interval position.
Yeah, so and I actually don't know the popover shortcuts for trills. I usually do it through properties as well, but
It's Shift O and then TR that's what it is.
Right, and presumably you could say TR minor third, and that would create a minor third, or
Yeah, and that I'm not sure of.
Shift O. Let's do a diminished. Well, no, yeah, diminished fifth. And
Yeah, there you go.
Now we have a. So that's. I mean, again, I just assumed that Dorico would respond that way because that's the way that Dorico works in general. But as I mentioned before, so I'm going to delete this trill here. And I'm going to say, okay, I want a trill, but I don't remember how to get to it. So remember that jump bar, J? Trill. So... it actually... So that's one of the things that you can't do that way. If you wanted to input it... whoops, I don't want a jazz turn. So yeah, you can't. I apologize. You can't do that with the jump bar. Jump bar is more for menu options up here. But wait, where is? I can't even find the trill mark now. Oh, there it is. So sometimes these things can be a little tricky to find. So if you were to use your mouse, which I strongly encourage not to do or discourage from doing, you would search for the proper thing over here on the side, which in this case says TR, so that's pretty obvious, and then the TR symbol here. But as you can see, there are many different trill options, and it also includes jazz falls and various articulations, includes arpeggiation. So I mean, there's only one note here, so you couldn't arpeggiate it. Glissandi, which in itself is great. Again, if you're coming from a program that doesn't really I mean, in Sibelius you just go to your line menu and hit glissandi, and then you manually adjust it. Well, in Dorico you select two notes, you hit, no, let's do the wavy glissandi, and it automatically creates a line between these two notes. And if this note happens to be an octave lower, well, my gliss just changed to accommodate that. So way more flexible in terms of not needing to chase after things to make it look right after you've made changes, which is very useful. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. I'm gonna do the same process that Olive did. In fact, well, should I do the same spot that you were? Yeah.
Yeah,
You know what?
if you want.
Let's do that. Just because. Oh, wait, no, sorry. What bar was it again?
122, I think.
122. There we go. All right. So this is the Reuven Herman Dorico work process. and you will have to forgive my terrible reading. Hopefully I'll get the notes right. So the first thing I'll say is and I'll repeat actually, is I try not to use the mouse too much. So I use the mouse basically for navigation. So scroll down, scroll up, shift in the mouse scroll wheel side to side, command in the scroll wheel, zoom out and zoom in, and once in a while to select notes. Other than that, I try and use keyboard only. So here I am, and let me just make sure I'm in gallery view. I am in write mode, because if I were in engrave mode, I tried to, well, first of all, you see that engrave mode automatically switches to page view, but if I were to try and input notations in engrave mode, it doesn't work. I can't do it. So basically, engraving is once all the notes are input, that's how you would change the way it looks. So here I'm going to open up my left panel so you can see. So I actually use not the numpad, which I was used to using in Sibelius, but I use the numbers above my keyboard to select the note value. And one of the reasons, even though I'm using a keyboard that has a numpad, is Dorico was created to be able to use on most modern laptops that do not have a numpad. So I just sort of have gotten into that habit, since that's what I do when I'm using the built-in laptop keyboard. So you can see as I press the various numbers 6, 5, 4, it changes, and you develop that muscle memory. So I'll often also use my piano keyboard to. Hang on, let me turn off the piano from Cubase, which I think, yeah, we don't need to hear that. So like Olive did, I'll use the piano keyboard, but sometimes I'll actually use my keyboard to input stuff, as crazy as that sounds. So you can use the names of the notes to input them. So E, but it didn't E an octave too high. By the way, I'm gonna turn off signposts here, hide signposts, just so I can see what's going on a little bit easier. Also, well, yeah, also turn off the bar numbers. Oh, I can't turn them off here. So that's an octave too high, and I'm going to use that option command arrow down. Since that's the last note I input, it's selected automatically, and so I can do whatever I want with this note. So I can move it to the right octave, but if I input the wrong note, I could also change it down to D sharp, and I do that with just option, or if you're on PC, just alt. So basically, my left hand is on the modifier keys, and my right hand is on the arrow keys. And I find this is my default hand position for doing this kind of thing, because I can now manipulate the notes however I want, with one other thing that I'll show you in a sec. So there's my E. I'm going to do G, and it's going to do the closest G. So that's right, and then B. So B on the computer keyboard, and now all the way up to G sharp, which is going to be in the wrong octave. So I'm going to go up an octave, and now you're going to say, well, wait, that's a dotted eighth note, not a quarter note. I'm going to say, well, that's fine, because I have my secret weapon. What's my secret weapon? It's this thing down here. So this is the beat division, I think. I think is what it's called. And so, if I recall correctly, the shortcut keys to adjust this, since, as I said, I don't like using my mouse, is option, and it's left bracket, and right bracket. And you can see the carrot, the orange thing. That's carrot spelled with an E, not like the vegetable. It adjusts as I adjust the duration. So this is kind of like my grid, and this is super useful. So I'm going back to 16th note grid, and I've got one other key combination to, well, a couple others, but to lengthen or shorten the duration of a note by the grid amount. So in this case, it's going to be Shift Option or Shift Alt if you're on PC, and left is going to shorten it by a 16th note. And there we go. Now I have my dotted eighth. And so if I undo that, Option Command will actually, or Control Option on PC will move it by that amount. So if I do Option Command right, it's actually going to shift right by a 16th note. So it's going to create a 16th rest, and now I have a quarter note which is actually tied over the bar line. And I find this incredibly flexible in terms of quickly notating without needing to adjust durations. I mean, now I'm going to input 16th notes since I've got a bunch of 16th notes in a row. But rather than, I rarely use the dot to create dotted notes because I find it easier to adjust the duration that way.
Mhm.
So then where am I? G sharp. Whoops. And the other thing that I'll often do, and this I actually picked up in Sibelius, is I will use the R key for repeat, because there are often a lot of repeat or repeating and just change the note. And sometimes it's easier to do that. In this case, I probably would say F. Is it F? No. So I just hit escape to get out of my notation, my note input view, and then I can use the arrow keys to go back and forth between notes. So.
And also between staves as well, if you use up and down.
Up and down will go between staves, although it's annoying if, in this case, you're working with 16th notes, you go down to a whole rest and you go back up and you're back at the beginning of the bar. So you got to be a little bit careful with that.
And if you have different elements too, like lyrics, dynamics, articulations, if you press tab, it'll cycle between those elements, which is useful as well.
Right. So I see there's a lot of talk about Stream Deck and stuff like that. I would recommend a program called Metagrid, which I have the server running here. The truth is, I have yet to really integrate using Metagrid into Dorico, but Metagrid allows you to control really any program on your computer, including Dorico, including Cubase, and they have built-in templates that work really well out of the box. You can also customize everything and suit it to your own workflow. I think it's like $15 on the App Store or something. But I mean, even just using the built-in template for Cubase is incredibly useful, especially if you're doing things like Project Logical Editor, where instead of going through here, if I switch over to Cubase here, I can show you what that looks like. If I go to, I have to select some MIDI. So if I go to MIDI Logical Editor Setup, then it gives me this horrible looking window, and I have to go to my custom ones, or here's Metagrid built-in ones, and you've got all sorts of very useful but really difficult to access. I mean, you can assign keyboard shortcuts, whereas with Metagrid you set up a button that does it automatically, or they have presets for, there you go, velocity plus 10. So basically any region you have selected or any notes you have selected, it will increase the velocity by 10, etc. And these all have, or many of them have buttons in the template. So you just press the button and it does it automatically. So that's such a big help with the workflow. And same with Dorico. Things that are more buried under various menus, you can do very quickly. So yeah, just to finish these 2 bars, because I don't want to let Olive have gotten further than I did. That would be embarrassing. And yes, it's kind of painful to watch me work this way, because if I was playing it in the keyboard, well, not necessarily with so many ledger lines, but I think I could play it a little bit faster. But this way, I'm doing one note at a time and sort of going back and forth between the two to make sure that that I'm getting the right pitches, which I maybe did. I think so. So, and then just sort of talking my way through this. So the last note I inputted is this F sharp, and I'm going to shift click here because I see that I have a slur. So that's the rare case where I use the mouse. And click there, input my my staccato, which is the right bracket key. And then, you know what, I'm not going to use the keyboard for this, the mouse for this. I'm just going to shift left click to the beginning of the phrase. And that's not what I meant to do. That's what I meant to do. S for slur. And then I'm going to input my hairpin. So one of the nice, I mean, this is a very small touch, but you can just do shift comma, which is the shift makes it the lesser than symbol, and that creates a hairpin, or greater than for a diminuendo. So getting back to the question about, well, what if I wanted the hairpin to start, say, on the second eighth, in the middle of beat 2? Well, this is where, again, this division comes in handy, because using that same option command and arrow, I can now move my hairpin back and forth, and if I want to make it 2/16 shorter, I just do that. So this gives me complete control over. Oh, by the way, just option will move it 1 beat at a time.
Is there a shortcut for changing the grid value?
Yes. So the default shortcuts are option, or I guess alt on PC, and the 2 brackets. So open bracket for smaller, and closed bracket for smaller, open bracket for bigger. So I know that you can assign custom shortcuts to specific grid values. I haven't done that. It might be worth doing since it's something that I use a lot. But yeah, just in terms of being able to quickly edit durations and positions, I find it really invaluable. Once I started working that way, I feel like it greatly sped up my workflow. So this is the same. So I option clicked, or again on PC, alt click to copy and paste. And so the piccolo I see basically duplicates only this, but I already have this whole thing selected. So I option clicked in the wrong place. So I'm actually going to copy the whole thing, and then I'm just going to delete these, and then I can see that this is actually an octave higher. So I'm going to go, and I apologize, I forget the what is it, Shift C for clef? But I'm just going to go into the clef sidebar
Just see.
and create a VA, and whoops, now my transposition is wrong, so I'm gonna make that an octave higher, and basically repeat that process for everybody. So the oboes are gonna be an octave lower, so I'm gonna actually I didn't even need to do that. I could have just used my grid to adjust it. So I'm gonna move this an octave. Whoops. Wrong instrument, because this is flute 3 and we only have 2 flutes here. So here's another good one is option option M. I always forget which is M and which is N. M as in Mary goes down to the next staff. N goes to the above staff, and it actually creates a piccolo harmony, which doesn't seem possible both performance-wise and range-wise. But yeah, now that I've got my oboe, you've got the shorthand in the written score that the second oboe is the same as the first. Well, all I have to do is option click, and there we go. The clarinets are the same as the oboes. Oops, wrong position. I'm just going to move that back an eighth note. There we go. Bass clarinet is different, but the bassoons are also the same thing, just an octave lower. Is that right? Yeah, there we go. And so there we go. I now have all my woodwinds with the exception of the bass clarinet done. And I don't know why we lost the slur in these. Oh, that must be when I moved it, something happened. But the dynamics are there, the articulations are there. The only thing that's not there that's on the page is the A2 for the flutes. And so if I switch into page view and we scroll in, well, we actually have two separate staves at the moment for flutes. And I think we'll wrap with a brief explanation about condensing and how that's used. Oh, and I also want to talk briefly about Divisi. So if we go into the engraving options, which is Shift Command E, easy to remember because that was the same as Sibelius. So there's a lot of stuff here, and I'm probably in the wrong menu anyway. No, I'm not. Okay. So yes, I am. Okay, it's in layout in the layout options. Shift Command L. There we go. So at the moment, condensing is disabled, and one of the reasons is, as you'll see, condensing slows things down considerably. But I'm going to enable it for the moment. So I'm turning on condensing. I'm not going to deal with any of these at the moment. So what condensing does is basically takes all of the doubled instruments, so woodwinds, brass, etc., and moves them onto a single staff, as you can see here. So in this, and it does it in a way by default that Dorico thinks makes sense. So in this case, the flutes were playing harmony and then go to unison at the end of bar 121, and so for some reason, and sometimes it's hard to figure out why, Dorico decided that bar 122, it made sense to keep it showing as up and down stems and then only go to A2 and bar 123. You can manually adjust that. You can also try and figure out why it's making those decisions. Sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's not. And then But the end result is, um, well, only the flute's condensed now, and the reason for that, I believe, is because we have custom. Oops, wrong layout. Yeah. So and Aleph, I think this is part of what you created as the template, was basically to match the way that the notated score was laid out, where the oboes, clarinets, and bassoons are actually on separate staves. We're specifically telling it don't condense those. So if I uncheck those and hit apply, now our oboes, clarinets, and bassoons should also become condensed. And so here we go. Now we can see A2, and these were already in A2, so they continue to be so. Oh no, they're okay. For whatever reason, the oboes are not condensing here. But the clarinets, for example, for some reason, only the first clarinet is showing up, because I probably didn't copy it to the second clarinet, if I had to guess. And if I wanted to check that, I'll just switch back to galley view. There we go, and look at that. I have no second clarinet notated here. So now I do, so I'm going to go back to my my galley view. Sorry, my page view. Right, I'm used to working in galley view, and now you can see that there are no longer rests for the second clarinet. So basically, most of the time, Dorico does a great job. This is one of the newer features. I think it only came out in 4. It might have come out in 3.5. The drawback is it's doing these calculations in the background in real time, so it does slow down the score, especially when you have larger scores. So there are cases where it makes it very difficult to work with condensing on, because it's just too slow to manage. And it's not perfect. It seems to have resolved it now, but before you could see there were 2 hairpins on the same staff, because every once in a while it decides that it needs to show individual dynamics for each instrument, even though it's it's the same on both instruments. So I would say it's not foolproof, but in general, it is so much more advanced than having to manually split out individual instruments from combined staves, and then if you make changes, make sure you make the changes in all places. I used to do that in Sibelius, and it was a nightmare. So that's a huge step forward. And I know that they're working on optimizing it. And again, you can customize everything, including things like, hey, all these horns are playing the same line. I want to have 4 horns on one staff. Well, I'm gonna go into. Oh, you know what? I need to get rid of them here. I'm gonna create a custom group of 4 horns, and now it is still thinking, because again it's going through the entire score. But there we go. Now I have 4 horns on a single staff, which to my mind makes a lot of sense. When you've got 4 or 6 horns playing the same line, why do we need to see it over 2 or 3 staves when we can just see it in one? And Dorico is smart enough to know that if it needs to split it out differently, then here we go. It's got 3 horns on the top staff.
Ruben, did that condense it all, the whole piece, or just that measure?
The whole piece.
So what if there were harmonies somewhere else? You couldn't
So
do it.
so no, it does. So you can see here where we've got two horns playing eighth notes here. This is bar 105. Let me find this in the score just so you can see what it looked like in the original. So here we go. This is so in the original you have horns 1 and 2 in the upper staff, and horn 3 in the lower staff. We assume it's horn 3 because actually no, it's 3 and 4. In fact, we're missing horn 3 here, which these are the kind of, actually horn 3 is doubling. Yeah, so we're missing horn 3 here.
Yeah.
But you can see that we have this lower horn 4 playing this half note, and so it actually, Dorico decided, okay, it makes sense here to split it into two different staves, and have these first two horns on the top staff. So in this case, you would probably want to have horn 3. In fact,
so horn 1 and 2 are represented by the upper voice. Horn 3 is the lower voice, and then horn 4 is on a separate stave.
So let me actually input horn 3 so that we're.
No, it's in there is what I'm saying, but it's treating.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. What it's doing is it's treating the top voice as horns 1 and 2 because the first two notes.
Ah, I see.
See what I'm saying?
Right. So if we go back to page view,
yeah, it just looks kind of funky.
Right. Yeah. Right. So this is one of those cases where if you,
because the stem is going all the way to
right.
Yeah.
Right. So this is one of those cases where I would see if I could override that, which, if you go into engrave mode and turn on signposts, so we can go to.
I don't know if it'll let you make engraving changes to condensed parts, will it?
I thought you could, but I might be mistaken. I know you can with Divisi. Maybe you can't with that. That's a good question. You might not be able to. Again, this is one of the newer features, and some things are still being developed. So, but like I said, it works most of the time really well. Not 100% of the time the way you would want it to work. So I'm just looking through the chat. So collisions are usually, yeah, of course, now for some reason that have this weird thing going on in bar 106. For the most part, Dorico is really good at avoiding collisions. There's something strange going on with this particular score, which I'll
if we change the justification, I think it'll probably
right. I mean,
that
you can see that for whatever reason, Dorico has decided to justify this. We have hide unused staves turned on, and so we've got all this empty space at the bottom, even though we've got this clash going on up there. So those are in layout options. You can adjust the ideal staves. What I can tell you, Kareem, is what I never do is what I used to do in Sibelius, which is grab a staff and just drag it down to create more space. Because usually there's some reason, even if it's sometimes difficult to figure out. Here we go. Oh right, that was. I'll bet this is gonna fix it, but this was doing weird things before, with the bar numbers. So we'll see what happens if. And again, it takes a little bit of time because it's calculating the entire score. Right. So it fixed that, but now we have this other crazy issue. So there's something going on in this particular template where there's a setting that's causing it to override something, which we're still trying to figure out. But 95% of the time, everything just looks really good out of the box without needing to do anything. And I mean, even with strange things like having 4 horns on one staff, it notates it in a way that makes sense and is very like I said, 95% of the time. So we're just about wrapped, and I know people are starting to leave. The last thing I just want to quickly address is Divisi. So one of the really, in my opinion, really cool innovations in Dorico. I'm going to go back to write mode here and to galley view, is being able to specify when you go to Divisi. I mean, usually this applies to strings. So let me go, where are we? Bar 160. So this is in the Superman March. I'm going to scroll there in the PDF so we can see what it looks like in the original. Okay, so here are the strings in the PDF. So we have our violas. Let's zoom out a little bit. Sorry, we have our cellos. So actually, if you look at the PDF, there are 2 violin staves, and then there are split staves in the printout that the orchestrator was using for violas and cellos, because they were Divisi quite often. So the cellos are playing this which is a great example. I wish I had thought to use the lock durations doing this rather than copy and paste over and over again. And then in bar 162, they go to presumably Divisi. I mean, it's actually written on one staff, and it's open fifths, which usually don't sound very good in string instruments, despite what you might think about those are just, your fingers are in the same position on two adjacent strings. But according to Tim Davies, chances are the cellists are going to play this Divisi. So I'm assuming that this is Divisi, and I can see that the violas are notated Divisi. So as you can see in Dorico, you have this Divisi signpost. So let's say I wanted to add Divisi in bar 161. All I have to do is right click, go to staff, change Divisi. And you can also assign a shortcut key to it. And you have really cool options. So you can change it to 2 sections or 3 sections or 4 sections. Or we can add a solo viola. So let's create 4 viola sections and a solo viola. I'm not going to change any of the other options. I'm leaving them default. And now, as you can see in bar 161, it is now going to give me, once it finishes thinking about it, I might have asked for too much Dorico to handle with 4 viola sections and a soloist.
Do you have condensing turned on still?
Well, I'm in galley mode, so that shouldn't affect it. There we go. No, I'm gonna turn it off just to make sure that that's not the issue. So I now have 5 viola staves in bar 161, and the reason it's only bar 161 is because I already told it to have 2 divisi sections in 162. But I can now enter. In fact, you know what? I'm just going to do this. I'm going to add intervals 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. Whoops. All right. Yeah, I'll make it a 5th. I'm going to use my diminished 5th. It turns out. I'm going to use my explode function to explode this onto those 2 staves. I'm going to duplicate that an octave up and duplicate this one an octave up again. So now I have 5 viola parts. So if I go back into page view, let's see what bar 161 is going to look like. It's probably going to be very... So it actually created 4 viola staves and a solo viola for this one bar. And then it goes back to 2 violas. But if I turned condensing on, and you can also tell it to condense divisi, it would presumably condense this down however it saw fit. So the advantage of that is when you're then looking at the viola part, in page view, there we go. So it's actually created a part where it's got 5 staves for that, and you can customize that, and then it goes to 2 staves for the divisi, the next system down. Whereas if you try doing that just by entering multiple notes, yeah, it might be legible, but it's going to be much less flexible. And if you're using multiple voices, it gets pretty messy. Here, you don't have to worry about multiple voices, because if Dorico decides it can fit into one staff, it'll do it with condensing. Otherwise, it'll split it automatically. And you basically, I mean, I'm sure everyone on this has had experience dealing with voices and trying to get voices to look right, and just wasting loads of time going through which voice is which, and no, that's the wrong one, and why is my rest not there, etc., etc. Here it's all automatic. All you have to do is create a divisi, and so let me go back to my full score view. I'll just go to over here. No, where's my unison in the viola? Let me go back to galley view. So here, for example, in bar 176 splits to divisi for 4 bars, splits to 3-way divisi for 2 bars, 2-way divisi, and then back to unison. And again, Dorico will automatically determine what the best way to display that in both the part and the score is. But I mean, you can see in this case, it actually goes back to unison in the middle of the bar. So in theory, you could actually, I'm gonna cut that unison out, or I'm gonna move it back there. Whoops, I just lost it. You could have go back to unison in the middle of a bar, I think it's easier to have it at the beginning of a bar, but again, it's very flexible. So I think that covers at least the way I've been using Divisi, and like I said, it works. Let me stop sharing my screen. It works really well for strings. I think for choral stuff, it would work very well. For everything else, for winds and brass, using the one instrument, one staff per instrument, and the players that we talked about in the setup menu is the best approach, and then using condensing. There's one other really nice benefit to using individual instruments for winds and brass, and that is if you export it as a MIDI file, every instrument gets exported as its own instrument, and that means if you're then creating a mock-up, you don't have to deal with splitting up the MIDI when you have multiple instruments, which really lends itself to doing much quicker mock-ups. It's a lot easier to combine instruments than it is to separate them on the mock-up side of things. So I think, well, we've gone about half an hour over, but hopefully some of you got some good ideas in terms of I won't say the right way to work, but possibilities of how you can work in Dorico, and how we use the Google Drive and Discord to coordinate our scores. Anybody have any last questions?
I have one real quickly. How can we find out if we are on, or if we can get on the Discord, get the spreadsheet, the Google?
So Discord. Let me post the link one more time here.
I've got the link.
So when you click on the link, it'll prompt you to if you don't have a Discord user, to create one and to install the program either on your computer or your phone. Okay. And once you've signed up, that invitation will work.
And my apologies, I don't have it. I thought I did.
So I'll have just posted it.
Oh, again. You have it now. Okay, thanks.
As for volunteering in general and having access to Google Drive, so everybody who signs up to volunteer through our website is added to our volunteer mailing list. And every time we start work on a score, we will set up a folder specific to that score. I mean, in some of the cases, these are copyrighted materials that we're not looking to give access to just anybody, but for volunteer purposes and the purposes of the score study, we'll make sure that everybody has access to the materials that we're using.
Okay, excuse my ignorance about Google Drive. I've rarely used it. I usually use direct things with clients, with sending materials. I don't use a Google Drive. How do I?
So, Ken, if you have a Gmail account,
I do.
then you'll have access through it to Google Drive. It's one of the Google services, and basically, if you are shared on a folder within Google Drive, so for instance the Superman suite, all the materials within that folder you would have access to, and you can also upload things on your end. So you would access it through a browser, and be able to download anything from there and upload anything to there.
Okay.
And
so I would locate it through my Google account, my Gmail.
Right. So once you said that you wanted to help out, we would add you as a user with access to the drive. You would get a notification email to your Gmail account saying that you have access to that drive.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and again, it takes a little getting used to in terms of how to use it, and it's still a bit of a mystery in certain regards. But it's one of those things where the more you do it, the easier it becomes.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, some great stuff shared. So a couple years ago, I think it was right before COVID hit, we did have John Barron do a seminar for us with the Dorico team. He gave us an A to Z. There's so many resources on YouTube too. There's a lot from Steinberg themselves. So there's so many tips we can cover. This is certainly the first of many. We will do more and more of this because it's good for all of us and it's good for the organization too in our prep. So
Yeah, absolutely. And just to reiterate one more time, the best way to learn is by doing it. So I mean, I'm glad that there are so many resources available online, but I know that most of what I've learned has been through figuring it out, trial and error, and seeing what's possible.
yeah.
So just reason number 3,293 to volunteer and help out.
I'll be frank, my very first Dorico scores, they went slow. You know, it took a lot of time to figure out some basics, but of course, the more you do it, the faster you get. And I'm not regretting my change because there's so many things that Dorico does superbly.
Right.
You know, there's some things that may frustrate you as you're still learning the logic of it, but it's really a superb layout program. So it's worth the uphill climb, is what I'm saying.
Absolutely. And full disclosure, I think it took me a couple years from when I first got Dorico until I switched over full time and stopped using Sibelius as my primary notation software, because it's not just the learning curve, it's also the unlearning curve of everything that you're used to from the previous software. So it's I don't want to mislead anybody into thinking that it's an instantaneous process. It takes time, but I think it's time well spent.
That said, I put this in the chat, but I'll mention it verbally that I was so determined to like figure this stuff out that I decided to do an entire YouTube myself of how to create a lead sheet, like click by click. And I created a lead sheet where I purposely covered every concept you would need in the process of doing a lead sheet. Now, a lead sheet is just one stave, obviously, but if you want to watch that, you can follow along. It's about 18 minutes, and you can learn a lot just by like following click by click by click and doing your first sheet, and then you can go off to the races from there. So
right,
more of that stuff from the Steinberg team.
Cool. Well, Olive, thank you for co-hosting this event, and
that was really great.
Thank you, David, and thanks all for sticking around. Hopefully, this wasn't too tedious.
Let me remind our people that next week we'll see the fruits of our labors. We're going to do Superman Part 2 exactly this time on Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Pacific time. So we'll dive into that because the first part of that study was just absolutely amazing. So we'll continue that next week, and we'll be starting to prep some new scores for the new year as well. So if you're interested in this, make sure you get signed up for volunteer teams.
Yes, we look forward to seeing you there, and Peter, have fun in Tahoe.
Yeah. All right, everybody, have a great day. We'll see you on the next one.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.